Welcome to Crisis in Perception.
Hello.
This is where we examine the systems shaping our world. The invisible architectures that dictate how we think, how we communicate, and ultimately how we decide what's actually true.
Right.
And if you're joining us for this deep dive today, you're probably someone who, well, you look around at the current state of public debate or the media landscape or maybe just the arguments at your family dinner table.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Exactly. And you think, something is fundamentally broken here. You watch people talk past each other. You see objectively terrible ideas gain massive traction, and it's just frustrating.
It is. It feels like society has forgotten how to reason.
It really does. So today, our mission is to unpack a foundational text that shines a huge spotlight on exactly what that broken thing is. We are diving into the book Mastering Logical Fallacies.
The Definitive Guide to Flawless Rhetoric by Michael Withey.
That's the one. And the core thesis we're going to explore today, which is just absolutely vital for understanding our modern world, is that bad arguments frequently win public debates.
They win elections.
Yeah.
They win advertising campaigns. They win in the court of public opinion. But here is the critical insight, right?
Yeah.
It's not because these arguments are logically sound.
Right. Often they're entirely devoid of logic.
Exactly. They win because the systems that reward persuasion, like our modern algorithmic media, political institutions, advertising networks, those systems rarely reward careful reasoning.
They reward attention.
Yes. So today, we're exploring the architecture of reasoning itself as a cognitive system that quietly structures modern discourse. When influence depends on winning engagement rather than clarifying the truth, fallacious reasoning actually becomes highly adaptive.
It spreads because it works.
It spreads because it works.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is a massive paradigm shift for a lot of people. We tend to assume that if an argument is persuasive, if it convinces millions of people, it must have some inherent logical merit.
We equate popularity with validity.
Exactly. But Withey is telling us that the surface confidence of an argument often hides deep structural flaws. And to really get a grip on this, we need to look at the brilliant analogy presented in the foreword of the book by Henry Zhang,
The former president of the Yale Debate Association.
Right. He compares arguments to a game of chess. In chess, there are strict rules, specific tactics, and completely avoidable blunders. The players who fall for cheap tricks are the ones who simply don't understand the underlying rules of the game.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
And here is the crucial difference for you, the listener. You can choose never to play a game of chess in your entire life.
You can just avoid the board completely.
But you cannot opt out of encountering arguments. You are participating in this game whether you want to or not. Every time you open your phone, turn on the TV, someone is trying to persuade you of something.
So understanding these rules is a vital life skill.
Like knowing how to cook or basic grammar, it's how you protect yourself from manipulation.
That chess analogy reveals something deeply structural about how we process information, actually. In chess, you learn to recognize patterns of mistakes just as much as you learn winning strategies.
Right.
A grandmaster doesn't just know what to do. They instantly recognize when their opponent has done something structurally fatal. When you understand logical fallacies, you learn to recognize recurring reasoning failures before they influence your judgment.
You're basically building an immune system against bad logic.
Precisely. But before we can start spotting the traps, we have to define the playing field, establish some foundational vocabulary from the text.
We have to know what the pieces on the board actually are.
Yeah. So first, what exactly is an argument? In the context of logic, it's not a shouting match.
It's not just yelling at someone in traffic.
No, or dropping a heated opinion in a comment section. It's simply a set of statements, which we call premises, that are given to advance a specific conclusion.
Okay, so it's a structured attempt to prove a point. You have the scaffolding, which are the premises, and the roof, which is the conclusion.
That's a good way to picture it. And within that, the text breaks things down into deductive and inductive arguments.
Right, and how do we differentiate those in a practical sense? Because I think people get those mixed up.
It comes down to the level of certainty the argument is claiming to provide. A deductive argument is one where the conclusion follows logically and necessarily from its premises. It's airtight.
Like mathematical proof.
Yes. If the premises are true and the structure is valid, the conclusion absolutely must be true. An inductive argument, on the other hand, well, the premises give very good, highly probable evidence for the conclusion, but it doesn't offer absolute certainty.
Give me an example of inductive.
So, inferring a general law of physics from thousands of experimental examples, that's inductive, it's highly reliable, but theoretically the next experiment could disprove it.
Got it. And this brings us to two critical terms that people constantly confuse, valid and sound. I want to slow down here because I found this distinction really tricky when I first read it. We use the word valid in everyday conversation to mean true or good. Like, oh, that's a valid point.
Right.
But in logic, it means something entirely different. Wait, so an argument can be perfectly valid but completely untrue. How does that work?
This is a massive stumbling block. In logic, an argument is valid strictly if its structural architecture holds up, meaning the conclusion logically follows the premises, regardless of whether those premises are actually based in reality.
Okay, lay it out for me.
Let me give you an absurd example.
Yeah.
Imagine I say all cats are extraterrestrial aliens. My pet is a cat. Therefore, my pet is an extraterrestrial alien.
Okay.
That argument is structurally 100% valid. The logic flows perfectly from A to B to C.
But it's completely unhinged from reality.
Precisely. And that is where the word sound comes in. An argument is only sound if it is both structurally valid and its premises are actually true in the real world. So my cat argument is valid, but it is not sound. Because the first premise that all cats are aliens is false. You need both validity and truth to have a sound argument.
That makes so much sense. The validity is the plumbing, and the soundness is whether the water flowing through the pipes is clean.
Great analogy.
And that sets us up to understand the first major category of failure that Withey outlines, which is the formal fallacy. I think of this as a complete structural collapse. The plumbing is shattered.
Yeah, the reasoning itself fails completely, even if the topic seems plausible.
The book gives a great example of a formal fallacy called affirming the consequent, which the author humorously notes is sometimes given the fake Latin name modus morans.
Modus morans, yeah. The foolish way. It's a structural breakdown that our brains often fail to catch because it mimics the rhythm of good logic.
How does it go?
The flawed structure is, if P is true, then Q is true. Q is true, therefore P must be true. It sounds rhythmic, it feels balanced, so we accept it.
But it collapses instantly under pressure.
Let's apply the book's specific example. The premises are, all pigeons are birds. Tweety is a bird, therefore Tweety is a pigeon.
Right. The conclusion doesn't follow at all. Tweety could be a bald eagle or an ostrich. The structure is broken because being a bird does not automatically make you a pigeon.
Even though all pigeons are birds.
What's scary is how often we see this in modern systems, especially in algorithmic categorization. Like, if you like science fiction movies, you watch movies. You watch a movie, therefore the algorithm assumes you like science fiction.
Yes. Our brains and our computer networks hear the categories overlapping and just assume the logic tracks.
You have to reject these outright. But as the book points out, these formal structural errors aren't even the most dangerous types of fallacies we face, are they?
No, they aren't. They're actually relatively easy to spot once you know what to look for. The primary focus of this deep dive, and the far more insidious threat, is the informal fallacy.
The trickier beast.
Much trickier, far more adaptive. With a formal fallacy, the mathematical skeleton of the argument is missing bones. But with an informal fallacy, the logical skeleton might actually be perfectly valid.
But the content is bad.
Yes. The content draped over that skeleton introduces massive cognitive distortions. The conclusion doesn't follow because the premises themselves are irrelevant or emotionally manipulative.
The text gives an incredibly funny example of this to show how an argument can be valid but completely useless. Circular reasoning.
Oh, that's a classic.
Imagine someone argues, there are men on the moon because there are men on the moon.
Right.
Logically, technically, according to the strictest rules of validity we just discussed, this is a valid argument. A equals A. The conclusion follows the premise because the premise is identical to the conclusion. The plumbing connects to itself.
But as a tool for debate, or for discovering truth, it is completely worthless.
Exactly. It doesn't prove anything. If you don't already believe there are men on the moon, that statement does nothing to convince you.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, back to our crisis in perception theme, we see exactly why informal fallacies are so dangerous. They mimic legitimate reasoning.
They wear the crisp, authoritative clothes of logic.
Exactly. But what they actually do is shift the entire epistemic evaluation of an argument away from facts and over to social, psychological, or emotional judgment.
Which is a massive vulnerability in our human information processing network.
And it is constantly being exploited by the media and political systems around us.
Which leads us directly into Section 2 of our exploration, focusing on one of the most widespread and effective systemic rhetorical efficiencies out there.
The ad hominem network.
This is where identity entirely replaces logic. Instead of evaluating a claim, the attack targets the speaker. It's like a magician's sleight of hand. The actual argument vanishes into thin air, and suddenly the audience's attention is entirely fixated on the trust or reputation or identity of the person at the podium.
The mechanism of the ad hominem is fascinating because it's fundamentally an issue of computational irrelevance. The human brain is always trying to save energy.
Evaluating complex data takes a lot of calories.
It does. Evaluating whether a person is a member of our in-group or out-group, whether they are likable or unlikable, that's cognitively much cheaper.
So we take the shortcut.
Always. The most direct version of this is the ad hominem abusive. This is where you attack the speaker's character directly to bypass their data. The text provides a wonderful historical example involving Cicero, the brilliant Roman orator.
Oh, I love this part.
Cicero came from a somewhat humble background, but through sheer intellect he rose to become the preeminent politician and lawyer of his day. However, the ruling aristocratic elite deeply resented him.
Of course they did.
During a highly contentious dispute in a court of law with a man named Metellus Nepos, Metellus realized he couldn't actually argue against the logic of Cicero's legal case. He was losing on the merits.
So what did he do?
He completely abandoned the legal argument and repeatedly asked, "Cicero, who's your father?"
It's the ultimate playground insult, but it's being deployed in the highest courts of the Roman Republic.
He couldn't beat the logic, so he attacked the class, the origin, and the bloodline of the speaker.
And the text makes a powerful point about how utterly heinous it is when these attacks target a speaker's race, class, religion, or gender. Because all of those identity markers are completely mathematically irrelevant to the truth of the statement being made.
Precisely. A person's character or identity does not dictate the truth of a factual claim. The author uses a great analogy. If a person claims the earth goes around the sun, it does not matter if that person is a drunk, a saint, rich, poor. None of that affects the orbital mechanics of the solar system.
Like Galileo famously muttered after being forced by the Inquisition to recant his heliocentric views, still, it moves.
The physical facts remain the facts, regardless of who is stating them.
That is such a crucial defensive tool for you, the listener, to keep in your back pocket. Whenever you are watching a debate and you see the argument shift from the data to the character of the person presenting the data, a massive alarm bell should ring in your head.
Absolutely.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second. It's not just about abusive insults. The book outlines another variation, the ad hominem circumstantial, also known as the appeal to motive.
This is where you try to discredit an argument based on the circumstances or the vested interests of the person making it.
Right. And honestly, shouldn't we care about motive?
You're touching on exactly why this fallacy is so successful. It feels like basic common sense. The circumstantial ad hominem is incredibly common in political and environmental debates.
Give us the example from the book.
Let's say a complex scientific claim is made about whether drilling in a specific part of Alaska will have a negligible environmental effect. If the CEO of Oil America makes that claim, presenting a stack of geological reports, people immediately say, well, of course he'd say that. He wants to make billions of dollars. Dismiss the reports. Right. Conversely, if a Greenpeace activist presents a stack of reports making the exact opposite claim, people on the other side say, of course they'd say that. They're radical environmentalist ideologues. Dismiss the reports.
But surely the fact that the CEO is literally being paid by the oil company matters to the methodology of the study, doesn't it? Why is it a fallacy to point that out?
This is where we have to make a razor-sharp distinction. The logic of the fallacy dictates that the claim itself, the actual physical environmental impact of the drill bit hitting the ice, is objectively true or false, entirely independent of the motives of the person speaking.
The motive doesn't change the chemistry.
Exactly. The CEO's financial interest doesn't magically alter the reality of an oil spill, just as the activist's passion doesn't change it either. The author notes a slight nuance here, though.
What's that?
Understanding a speaker's motive is a perfectly valid reason to scrutinize their evidence more closely. If you know the oil CEO is presenting the data, you should absolutely double-check their methodology, look for manipulated variables, demand peer review.
That makes sense.
However, and this is the vital logical rule, you still cannot logically dismiss the data solely because of who presented it. If the math is right, the math is right. The motive is a reason to check the work. It is never a substitute for doing the work.
Okay, scrutiny versus dismissal. That's a great way to frame it. Now here's where it gets into incredibly spicy territory. Ad hominem, guilt by association, and its most extreme form, the reductio ad Hitlerum.
Yes.
And before we dive into this, I want to remind you, the listener, that our goal here is entirely impartial. We are looking strictly at the mechanical structure of these arguments as presented in the source text, without endorsing any political sides or ideologies. We're analyzing the plumbing, not the water.
With that important neutral context in place, guilt by association is the tactic of attacking a claim based purely on who else happens to support it. It relies on the network effect of reputation.
What's the suppressed premise there?
The implicit premise is, if an unsavory or evil person believes X, then X must inherently be false. The book gives a clear structural example. John believes in higher taxation for the wealthy, but Fidel Castro also believed in higher taxes for the wealthy. Hence, we should reject higher taxes for the wealthy.
Structurally, it's just so absurd when you lay it out cleanly like that. It implies that if a bad person likes something, that thing absorbs their badness like a sponge.
But people fall for it constantly.
And the ultimate systemic shortcut, the absolute trump card of modern online discourse, is reductio ad Hitlerum, dismissing a position purely on the grounds that Hitler or the Third Reich advocated for it.
The author points out that this tactic has been relentlessly weaponized against practically everything across the political spectrum. Liberalism, socialism, gun control, environmentalism, the traditional family, anti-smoking laws, all of them have been linked to the Third Reich by their respective opponents in a desperate attempt to completely shut down debate.
It is the ultimate conversation stopper, because the social penalty for being associated with the Third Reich is so overwhelmingly toxic that the person defending the argument is forced to abandon their data just to defend their own moral character.
The text highlights a fascinating, specific, and frankly bizarre historical example of this, involving Theodor Adorno, a prominent sociologist of the Frankfurt School.
The astrology example.
Yes. In his sociological analysis of newspaper horoscope columns, titled The Stars Down to Earth, Adorno castigated a specific horoscope's advice that told readers to accept all invitations.
Just normal, generic horoscope advice.
Right. But Adorno's rebuttal was that this trend of obligatory participation in leisure time activities was a hallmark of totalitarian countries, specifically linking it to the compulsory organizations of the Third Reich. He essentially used a highly sophisticated flavor of reductio ad Hitlerum to critique astrology.
Which is just wild. You're bringing in the horrors of 20th century totalitarianism to disprove a newspaper column telling people to go to a dinner party. It shows how seductive this structural shortcut is, even for brilliant philosophers.
He really does.
But again, the structural comeback here for the listener is remarkably simple. Facts are not rendered false just because an evil person believed them. The book points out the obvious logic. Hitler firmly believed that Berlin was in Germany.
He also championed the building of expansive highway systems.
Right. Does that mean we should suddenly doubt the geographic location of Berlin? Should we completely stop building highways out of moral panic? Of course not. It's a massive, manipulative, logical bypass.
And this brings us to the final and perhaps the most emotionally potent major node in the ad hominem network, the tu quoque.
Ah, tu quoque.
It translates to you too, but in modern English, it's best understood as the hypocrite attack. This occurs when you attempt to undermine an argument against a certain behavior by pointing out that the proponent themselves engages in that exact same behavior.
Oh, this one is everywhere. It is the lifeblood of political debate. But the classic everyday example from the book is a dad who smokes a pack of cigarettes a day, sitting his kid down and telling him, "Don't take up smoking, it's terrible for your health."
And the kid immediately rolls his eyes and replies, "You smoke a pack a day. Why on earth should I listen to you?"
Or, looking at public figures, the text cites the real-life example of former UK Prime Minister David Cameron. He launched a massive public initiative to give parents better child-rearing advice.
But media commentators immediately attacked him because he had once, notoriously, accidentally left his own child in a pub toilet.
The media argument was, who are you to criticize bad parenting or give advice when you left your kid in a pub? Why does it feel so incredibly good to call it a hypocrite like that?
If we look at the evolutionary psychology behind it, human social structures are deeply reliant on fairness and shared sacrifice. When someone preaches one set of rules but secretly plays by another, our brains register them as a defector from the social contract.
Our sense of justice just lights up.
The emotional satisfaction of calling out hypocrisy is immensely powerful, which is why this fallacy works so incredibly well on a systemic level. It feels like a devastating checkmate.
But from a strict logical standpoint?
It is completely 100% irrelevant to the truth of the claim being made. The behavioral consistency of the proponent does not alter reality. A hypocrite can still state a factual truth.
Right. The chain-smoking father is absolutely scientifically correct that smoking is unhealthy. His personal addiction does not magically make the tar in the cigarettes healthy.
And David Cameron's past embarrassing mistake does not invalidate whatever sociological data his child-rearing initiative was actually presenting. The messenger is flawed, but the message remains factually intact.
So the structural comeback when you face this is to firmly say, we are arguing about the objective facts of the matter, not about our respective personal behaviors.
Though the book does offer a tiny important caveat here that we shouldn't ignore. It mentions that someone's actions do express their implicit internal commitments.
How so?
If you smack your children, you are implicitly committed to the view that it's okay to smack children, regardless of what you say publicly. So pointing out hypocrisy can be a perfectly valid way to question someone's internal consistency or sincerity.
But you must remember that it never disproves the factual claim they are making about the world.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is how all of these ad hominem attacks, abusive, circumstantial, guilt by association, tu quoque, they all persist precisely because they exploit our brain's heavy reliance on heuristics.
Mental shortcuts.
Yes. To process the exhausting amount of information in our digital environment, our brains look for quick ways to evaluate whether we should accept a claim. Deciding whether we like or trust the person speaking takes almost zero effort.
Deeply analyzing the data they are presenting takes massive effort. The fallacies offer us a lazy way out.
And that perfect transition brings us to Section 3, the heuristics of the crowd, where we look at how fallacies exploit not just individual identity, but mass emotion, tradition, and authority.
If ad hominem attacks the speaker, these fallacies bypass the speaker entirely to elicit a primal, instinctual reaction from the audience. Let's start with the appeal to emotion,
which acts as an umbrella for tactics like the appeal to pity and the appeal to fear. This is where we see logic completely abandoned in favor of pure psychological manipulation.
The appeal to emotion attempts to support a position not by offering a single shred of evidence, but by deliberately manipulating feelings.
Advertisers use this constantly. They'll imply that if you don't buy their specific brand of deodorant, you'll smell terrible, you'll be socially ostracized, and end up utterly alone. They aren't presenting a chemical analysis of their product, they're triggering your deepest social anxieties.
And the book shares an old, incredibly dark piece of humor to illustrate the appeal to pity. A man is caught red-handed murdering his parents with an axe. He's standing in court, the evidence is undeniable, and he begs the judge for a lenient sentence, saying, "Please have pity on me, can't you see I'm an orphan?"
It's deeply absurd, but it highlights the structural flaw perfectly. The invocation of pity has absolutely no bearing on the facts of the crime. Pity might be a reason for mercy, but it is not a logical argument against guilt.
And when we scale this up from an individual courtroom to the societal level, we see the appeal to fear weaponized with terrifying efficiency by demagogues.
Demagogues shore up their political power by deliberately playing on their followers' deepest fears.
By making a specific group look existentially scary, they completely bypass the need to logically justify their own policies. If I can convince you that the barbarians are at the gates, you aren't going to ask me for a detailed spreadsheet of my tax policy.
Neurologically, when the fear center of the brain is hijacked, our critical thinking centers are actively suppressed. Fear creates an us versus them dynamic that is entirely insulated from logical scrutiny.
Which leads right into the appeal to common belief, or the wisdom of crowds fallacy. The core logic here is deceptively simple. Everybody believes that P is true, therefore P must be true.
The book gives the hilarious example of the classic urban myth about flushing baby crocodiles down the toilet in New York City where they grow up in the sewers and bite people. You ask someone for evidence and their response is, "Come on, everybody knows it's true."
This fallacy relies on a suppressed and entirely false premise that if everybody believes something, the sheer weight of numbers makes it accurate. But human beings are deeply fallible.
The text reminds us of the old song lyric, "They all laughed at Christopher Columbus when he said the world was round." A consensus of belief does not alter physical reality.
If 1 million people believe a foolish thing, It is still a foolish thing.
But wait, let me jump in here. We actually do use the wisdom of crowds successfully in some areas. If you go to a county fair and ask 1,000 people to guess the weight of a cow, the average of their guesses is usually incredibly accurate. We use collective pricing in free markets. Why is the wisdom of crowds a fallacy here, but a valid tool there?
That is a brilliant distinction. The difference lies in independent versus dependent variables. At the county fair, people are making independent guesses based on their own visual estimation. When you aggregate thousands of independent data points, the errors tend to cancel each other out.
Okay.
But in public discourse, belief is highly dependent. It is based on social contagion. If everyone in a prejudiced group believes something terrible about another group, they didn't arrive at that conclusion independently. They believe it probably because everyone around them believes it.
That collective belief doesn't make it true. It just makes it a collective folly.
Exactly. The wisdom of crowds often just allows false beliefs to calcify into what we mistakenly call common sense. You have to be so careful not to let the popularity of an idea substitute for the rigorous proof of an idea.
This collective heuristic takes an even more rigid form in the appeal to heaven and the appeal to normality. Again, maintaining strict neutrality on the historical politics here, the text uses Richard Nixon's famous appeal to the silent majority as a prime example.
During the massive political and social turmoil of the late 1960s, Nixon argued that the vocal protesters did not represent the views of ordinary, normal, hard-working Americans.
The rhetorical trick there is extraordinarily powerful. It categorizes the opposition as fundamentally abnormal.
The underlying logic is, you, my supporters, are the normal majority. They are the abnormal fringe minority. Therefore, you can comfortably ignore their arguments completely.
It dismisses the entire content of the protests, the systemic critiques, the ethical arguments, without ever having to address a single substantive argument. It leverages the human desire to be part of the normal in-group to crush dissenting logic.
Similar to that is the appeal to tradition. This is essentially an appeal to the crowd, where the popular crowd happens to include the dead. The argument is that we should believe something simply because it is what our ancestors did. We've always done it this way.
But the ignorance of the past does not form a valid logical premise for making decisions in the present. Just because they bled patients with leeches in the Middle Ages doesn't mean it's a sound medical practice today.
However, the author adds a deep layer of nuance to tradition that we shouldn't ignore. It would be intellectually dishonest to just write off all tradition.
Right.
The text notes that while tradition alone is not a logical justification, traditions can encode deep, hard-won societal wisdom that might not be immediately apparent to modern eyes.
The book uses the example of traditional societal strictures against sex outside of marriage, noting that historically these weren't just arbitrary rules. They formed part of a highly complex, load-bearing network of practices concerning marriage, property rights, and societal stability before modern social safety nets.
The point isn't that the tradition is automatically right for today, but that aggressively attacking it without understanding the invisible societal structures it represents can have disastrous consequences. The burden of proof remains on the person defending the tradition to explain why it is functionally useful today, rather than just pointing to its age.
The last heuristic in this section is one we see every single day online: anonymous authority. Think about how often you hear phrases like experts say, or studies show, or my absolute favorite, that's what they say.
The book uses Donald Trump's rhetorical style as a prime structural example of this tactic. Without validating or invalidating his specific political claims, the text points out that using vague, unnamed authorities allows the speaker to lend an aura of high credibility to wild claims without ever providing a verifiable source.
If you can't name the expert, if you can't link the study, it's not an argument, it's a rumor disguised in a lab coat.
Well said. All of these crowd heuristics, manipulating emotion, leaning on common belief, invoking tradition, they ask you to substitute the hard work of logical verification with the comfortable feeling of social conformity.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. We've talked about how people use identity and emotion. Let's move to section 4 and talk about how they weaponize data. Because nothing shuts down a debate faster than someone confidently throwing out a highly specific number.
We are conditioned to believe that numbers equate to objective truth. If there's a decimal point, it must be science.
But Withey exposes how this assumption is exploited through the concept of fake precision.
Fake precision is the act of supporting an argument with numerical data that appears to be mathematically exact, but is actually fundamentally unknowable, wildly estimated, or fabricated.
The humor of this human tendency is perfectly captured in the famous joke, 70% of the statistics you read in books are just made up by the author.
I love that one.
Oh.
And the book gives a stunning historical example of this from Robert Kennedy in 1961, back when he was serving as the Attorney General. In a major speech, Kennedy claimed that exactly 90% of the major racketeers would be out of business by the end of this year if the public simply stood up to corruption.
It sounds incredibly authoritative, 90%. But logically, stop and think about it. How could anyone possibly calculate the precise future failure rate of clandestine criminal enterprises based on a vague shift in public morality?
It is statistically and practically impossible. It's a complete guess. But the precision of the number gives the illusion of rigorous scientific backing to a purely political rallying cry.
And closely related to fake precision is a systemic flaw that defines our modern era, cherry picking. Selectively citing data that perfectly supports your conclusion while ignoring the massive mountain of data that contradicts it.
The book uses a powerful medical example. Imagine a study where 100 cancer sufferers used a homeopathic remedy, and all 100 of them miraculously recovered. Someone waves the study around on social media and screams, "Look, absolute proof that homeopathy cures cancer."
What they fail to mention, of course, is the denominator. They fail to mention that the study actually tracked 10,000 subjects in total, and the other 9,900 people who used the homeopathy tragically died.
This is profoundly dangerous, especially today. In our current algorithm-driven media environment, networks are fundamentally designed to reward engagement and sensationalism above all else.
A headline that accurately reads, "Homeopathy fails to cure 9,900 people," is boring. No one clicks it. But a headline that reads, "Miracle homeopathy cures 100 people," is going to get millions of clicks.
The system literally, financially incentivizes cherry-picking the most sensational, anomalous data points and presenting them as the entire truth.
It's terrifying when you realize the architecture of the internet basically runs on an engine of cherry-picked outrage. The algorithm hides the denominator. And that brings us to the argument from ignorance and the concept of unfalsifiability.
This is all about the sneaky tactic of shifting the burden of proof. The argument from ignorance claims that something is absolutely true simply because there is no evidence proving it is false.
You see this all the time. Extraterrestrial aliens walk among us in disguise. What evidence do you have to prove they don't?
This is a fundamental misunderstanding of how evidence and logic work. The philosopher Bertrand Russell famously illustrated this failure with his brilliant concept known as Russell's teapot.
Explain the teapot.
He argued, imagine I claim with absolute seriousness that there is a tiny, microscopic china teapot orbiting the sun somewhere in space between Earth and Mars. Because the teapot is too small to be seen by even our most powerful telescopes, you cannot definitively prove that it is not there.
But does your inability to disprove my microscopic teapot mean you should reasonably believe it exists? Of course not. The logical rule is that the burden of proof always lies with the person making the positive claim.
It is not the skeptic's job to prove a negative. If you claim the aliens are here, you have to produce the alien.
And this ties directly into the trap of unfalsifiability. For any claim to be a substantive, meaningful claim about reality, it fundamentally has to be capable of being proven false. There has to be a specific scenario where you could say, if X happens, my theory is wrong.
The book uses classic Marxist theory as an example of an unfalsifiable system. According to the original theory, capitalism would inevitably impoverish the working class to such an extreme degree, leading them to violently revolt.
But as the author points out, and again, strictly analyzing the logical structure here, when those specific predictions failed to materialize in advanced capitalist societies, the theory didn't offer a criterion by which it could be judged false.
Adherents often used endless ad hoc maneuvers to explain away the failure, saying things like, well, a revolution didn't happen because mass culture temporarily pacified the workers.
When a theory can endlessly warp itself to explain absolutely any outcome, it becomes unfalsifiable. And if there is no possible evidence that could ever prove a theory wrong, it ceases to be a logical argument and crosses over into becoming pure dogma.
Which is exactly how modern conspiracy theories work. They are epistemically sealed environments. If you show a conspiracy theorist evidence that contradicts their theory, they just say, oh, that evidence was planted by the deep state as part of the cover-up.
The lack of evidence becomes proof of how deep the conspiracy goes. It seals itself off from logic entirely. This raises an important question. How do we, as normally rational people, get trapped in these self-sealing arguments?
Often, it happens through linguistic distractions and structural traps, which brings us to Section 5. Sometimes the trap isn't the data, sometimes the words themselves are the trap.
Yes, the fallacy of ambiguity, where an argument deliberately trades on the double meanings of words to create a completely false conclusion. The book outlines equivocation, which is a semantic ambiguity, and syntactic ambiguity, which involves grammar.
The example for equivocation in the text is great. It goes, Peter is a short professional basketball player. Hence, Peter is a professional basketball player, and he is short.
The logical failure here is that the word short is being used in two completely different contexts. It's linguistic sleight of hand. In the premise, short is used attributively. He is short relative to the extreme average height of an NBA player. He might be 6'5" tall.
In the conclusion, the word short is used predicatively. It implies he is below average height for a normal human being. By equivocating on the single word, the argument draws a completely false conclusion about his physical size.
I love the syntactic ambiguity example even more. It's the classic Groucho Marx joke.
Ah, yes. One morning I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How he got into my pajamas, I'll never know.
It's perfect. The humor comes entirely from the grammatical structure, allowing two completely different interpretations of who is actually wearing the pajamas, Groucho or the elephant.
It's brilliant for comedy. But as the book warns, it belongs in the music hall, not in a debating chamber. If a politician does that with policy language, they aren't making a joke. They are leaving a deliberate loophole so they can claim they meant something else later.
And when people use ambiguity in a debate, they are very often setting up a red herring, attempting to derail the conversation by bringing in completely irrelevant, highly distracting considerations.
The outline refers to this as the Chewbacca defense, a pop culture reference to a satirical legal strategy where a lawyer deliberately confuses the jury with irrelevant information about the character Chewbacca to distract them from the facts of the case.
Throw a smoke bomb of irrelevance and run away from the actual debate. Another way people shamelessly cheat the system is by moving the goalposts. You are arguing with someone, you both agree on what specific evidence is needed to prove a point. You go out, find that exact evidence, bring it back, and suddenly they say, well, that's not enough. Now I need you to prove this other entirely new thing.
The author is very clear on this point. It is cheating. When someone moves the goalposts, they are violating the fundamental agreed-upon rules of engagement simply because their ego refuses to concede the point.
The only real comeback is to stop arguing the facts and explicitly call out that they are changing the standard of proof. You have to say, I met your standard, and now you are changing the rules.
And sometimes, people won't accept any proof at all unless it represents flawless perfection. This is known as the nirvana fallacy, rejecting a proposed solution simply because it doesn't solve the problem perfectly.
The classic example is, why should we mandate wearing seatbelts? People still die in car crashes. It rejects a massive statistical improvement because it falls short of an impossible utopian standard where 0 people die.
Finally, in this section on structural traps, we have the appeal to nature, or the naturalistic fallacy. The deeply embedded assumption that whatever is natural is inherently good, and whatever is unnatural is inherently bad.
The text points out that nature is not always benign. Getting stung by a swarm of wasps is entirely natural. Dying of cholera is natural, but they certainly aren't good.
The book highlights a wonderfully witty historical retort regarding this. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued heavily for the inherent goodness of the natural state of man. He thought society corrupted us.
Joseph de Maistre responded to Rousseau's logic with a brilliant observation, saying it would be equally correct to say that sheep are born carnivorous and everywhere eat grass.
It perfectly highlights the total absurdity of conflating what is in nature with what ought to be morally, simply by invoking the magical word nature.
If we pull all of these diverse threads together, the formal breakdowns like modus morans, the identity-based ad hominem attacks, the crowd heuristics exploiting fear and tradition, the algorithmically weaponized data of cherry-picking, and the linguistic traps of ambiguity, we arrive at Section 6, the defensive advantage.
We have to look at the systemic danger here. The feedback loop we are currently caught in is that the more these fallacious rhetorical strategies gain attention, the more they are algorithmically rewarded with virality, and the more they become normalized.
Debate completely degrades from a collaborative societal search for truth into a zero-sum tribal contest of narrative framing. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Why should you care about memorizing Latin terms like tu quoque or understanding the mechanics of unfalsifiability?
It means that recognizing these specific fallacies gives you a distinct, powerful defensive advantage in your daily life. You are bombarded by these traps every single day on the evening news, in your doom-scrolling feeds, in corporate advertisements, and in political speeches.
By spotting the hidden vulnerabilities in the structures of others' arguments, you inoculate your own mind. You avoid being manipulated by logical sleight of hand. You stop letting demagogues hijack your fear, and you stop letting politicians move the goalposts on you.
Furthermore, knowing these pitfalls actively helps you construct better, more resilient arguments in your own life. When you are interviewing for a job, advocating for a cause in your community, or just arguing with your uncle over dinner, building bulletproof logic allows you to communicate with clarity, integrity, and genuine persuasive power.
You become a sharper thinker because you become a better, more vigilant defender of your own mind. It is exactly like Henry Zhang said in the foreword of the book. Watching the best thinkers is beautiful because their brilliance is obvious. They don't need cheap tricks. You can learn the rules of the board.
But this leaves us with a final, highly provocative thought to ponder. We have clearly established that our modern media and political systems are currently built and financially incentivized to reward these logical shortcuts and emotional appeals. But what if we could somehow flip the board?
What would a society or a digital media ecosystem built entirely on sound, rigorous, formal logic actually look like?
Would it be a pristine utopia of rational discourse and rapid human progress? And given the messy, emotional, deeply heuristic-driven reality of human nature, would we even want to participate in it?
Would it feel too cold, too sterile? Or is the chaotic, flawed game of persuasion, fallacies and all, an inseparable part of what makes us uniquely human?
It's a profound question.
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.